He slapped the billionaire's dead wife in front of everyone. Then she blinked. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. My name is Amelia Hayes. I'm 36 years old, and for most of my adult life, I've been the quiet footnote in my family's boisterous, self-congratulatory narrative. The artistic one, they'd call me, a euphemism for unambitious and unlikely to amount to much, especially when compared to my younger sister, Olivia, the golden child, the pragmatic lawyer with the equally pragmatic fiancé, Thomas. Tonight was their engagement party, a lavish affair at my parents' sprawling suburban home, and I was, as usual, blending into the damask wallpaper, a ghost at their feast of success. Olivia was holding court, regaling a circle of admirers with tales of her latest courtroom victory, while my mother, Beatrice, beamed with a pride so intense it practically radiated heat. My father, Gerald, stood by, nodding indulgently, occasionally interjecting with a proud, "That's my girl." I was nursing a glass of lukewarm champagne, idly observing the scene, when Thomas, Olivia's fiancé, a man I'd only met a handful of times and who seemed genuinely pleasant, if a little overwhelmed by my family's particular brand of effusive self-regard, excused himself from Olivia's orbit and wandered over to where I was standing near the overflowing buffet table. "Amelia, right?" he said, offering a polite smile. "We haven't really had a chance to talk. Olivia tells me you're an artist?" There was again that vague, dismissive label. "Something like that," I murmured, already anticipating the usual follow-up questions about whether I sold anything or if it was just a hobby. But Thomas surprised me. He pulled out his phone. "Hayes. Amelia Hayes," he mused, tapping at the screen. "Is that with an Hayes?" My stomach gave a little lurch. My art, as they called it, wasn't exactly gallery openings and paint-stained smocks. For the past 8 years, under a carefully guarded pseudonym, Etheria, I've been building one of the most successful independent digital animation studios in the world, creating critically acclaimed short films and award-winning commercial campaigns for global entities. My work seen by millions, my company valued in the high 8 figures. My family, of course, knew nothing of Etheria. To them, I was just Amelia, the dreamy, impractical older daughter who dabbled in computer stuff. Thomas's brow furrowed slightly as he scrolled. Then his eyes widened, almost imperceptibly at first, then with a dawning, incredulous shock. He looked up from his phone, then back at me, then back at his phone. "Wait a minute," he breathed, his voice a mixture of disbelief and awe. Are you Etheria?" "The Etheria Studios." My mother, sensing a lull in Olivia's spotlight, chose that precise moment to drift over, her smile tight. "Thomas, dear, don't let Amelia bore you with her little projects. She's always got some new digital thingamajig she's working on. Mostly just for fun, you know." Thomas didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed on me, his jaw practically on the expensive Persian rug. "Little projects?" he echoed, his voice now several decibels louder, attracting the attention of nearby guests, including Olivia and my father. "Beatrice, Gerald, do you have any idea who your daughter actually is?" The silence that fell over that corner of the room was sudden and absolute. My mother's smile froze. Olivia looked annoyed at the interruption. My father just looked confused. Thomas, bless his unsuspecting heart, turned his phone around, displaying the Etheria Studios homepage, with its impressive portfolio and a recent headline. Etheria, the anonymous visionary revolutionizing digital animation. Forbes Tech. My family, the people who had dismissed me as a nobody for my entire life, were about to get a crash course in just how wrong they had been. If you've ever felt invisible to the people who should see you most clearly, only to have your truth unexpectedly brought to light, share where you're watching from in the comments below, and please hit that like and subscribe button. Because the fallout from that Google search was a masterpiece of unintended consequences, a story that's still unfolding. Growing up in the meticulously manicured suburbs of Westport, Connecticut, our family portrait was one of carefully constructed perfection, with Olivia always positioned in the center, bathed in the warm glow of my parents' adoration. She was everything they valued: academically gifted, socially adept, and possessed of a ruthless pragmatism that they mistook for ambition. She aced her SATs, captained the debate team, and went to Yale Law, every achievement a gold star on their parental report card. I, on the other hand, was the quiet observer, the child who lived more in her imagination than in the tangible world of their expectations. My passions were for drawing, for storytelling, for the nascent world of computer graphics that was just beginning to emerge in the late 90s. When Olivia was dissecting frogs in AP biology, I was teaching myself rudimentary animation software on our clunky family desktop. When she was charming her way onto the student council, I was filling sketchbooks with fantastical creatures and otherworldly landscapes. "What are you going to do with all that, doodling, Amelia?" my mother would ask, her tone a familiar blend of exasperation and disappointment. "There's no future in it. You need to focus on practical skills like Olivia." My father, a successful but emotionally distant investment banker, would simply grunt his agreement, his nose buried in the Wall Street Journal. He measured worth in stock portfolios and quarterly earnings, and my artistic inclinations clearly didn't register on his balance sheet. The message was clear. I was a dreamer, an impracticality, a deviation from their carefully plotted path to respectable, conventional success. Olivia, a natural mimic of my parents' values, quickly learned to echo their dismissiveness. "Oh, Amelia's just off in her fantasy world again," she'd say to her friends, a patronizing little smile playing on her lips when I tried to share a new animation I'd created. The few times I dared to show my early work to my parents, their reactions were lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, her eyes glazing over. "But have you thought about getting a real estate license? Good money in that." My father wouldn't even pretend to engage, offering a non-committal, interesting, before retreating to his study. Their lack of interest, their subtle but constant invalidation, was a slow poison. It chipped away at my confidence, made me doubt my own talents, my own vision. But it also, paradoxically, fueled a quiet, fierce determination within me. If they wouldn't see my worth, I would prove it to myself. After college, where I studied fine arts and computer science, a combination my parents found utterly perplexing, I took a series of uninspiring graphic design jobs, paying the bills while secretly honing my skills in digital animation. I devoured online tutorials, experimented with new software, and gradually began to develop my own unique style, a blend of ethereal beauty and intricate technical detail. The idea for Etheria Studios was born out of a desire for creative autonomy, a space where I could bring my visions to life without compromise, without the soul-crushing critiques of clients who wanted more pop or less weird. I started it as a side project, working late into the night, fueled by ramen noodles and an unshakable belief in the power of visual storytelling. I chose the pseudonym Etheria, a name that evoked the luminous, otherworldly quality I sought in my work, to shield myself from my family's inevitable judgment, and perhaps from my own lingering fear of failure. In those early years, it was a struggle. I took on small freelance gigs, animated explainer videos for local businesses, created motion graphics for independent filmmakers, anything to build a portfolio and keep the lights on in my tiny studio apartment. There were countless rejections, moments of profound self-doubt, days when I was tempted to give up, to succumb to my family's narrative of me as the impractical dreamer. But then, a small project would land, a piece of positive feedback would come through, a new animation technique would click, and the spark would reignite. My first break came when a short, non-narrative animated piece I created, a visual poem about the life cycle of a star, went viral on a niche animation forum. It was picked up by a few influential art blogs, and suddenly, I was getting inquiries from advertising agencies, from game developers, even from a renowned art gallery in New York. I reinvested every penny I earned back into Etheria, upgrading my equipment, subscribing to cutting-edge software, and eventually, cautiously, hiring my first freelance collaborator, a brilliant sound designer I met online. Meanwhile, back in Westport, the family narrative remained unchanged. Olivia was climbing the corporate ladder at a prestigious law firm, her engagement to Thomas, a similarly ambitious lawyer from a good family, the latest jewel in her crown. My parents were ecstatic. "He's perfect for her, Amelia," my mother gushed over the phone. "So successful, so stable. Not like some of those artistic types you used to associate with." The implication, as always, was clear. I remembered one particularly painful Christmas, a few years into Etheria's slow but steady growth. I had just completed a complex animated sequence for a documentary film, a piece I was incredibly proud of. I tried to show a clip to my family, hoping for a flicker of interest, of acknowledgement. Olivia had sighed theatrically. "Oh, Amelia, are we going to watch your cartoons again? Some of us have actual work to discuss." My father had cleared his throat and changed the subject to Olivia's upcoming ski trip to Aspen with Thomas's family. My mother had simply patted my arm and said, "That's nice, dear. Perhaps you can make some little animations for Chloe's wedding invitations. If you have time, of course." The casual dismissal, the utter lack of curiosity about the work that consumed my life, that was beginning to define me in a world far removed from theirs, was a familiar ache. But this time, something was different. I no longer felt the desperate need for their approval. Their world, with its narrow definitions of success, its obsession with appearances, felt increasingly alien to me. My world, the world of Etheria, was vibrant, challenging, and filled with the quiet satisfaction of creation. It was a world they couldn't see, couldn't comprehend, and therefore couldn't diminish. Or so I thought. The invitation to Olivia's engagement party had arrived a month earlier, a thick, cream-colored cardstock affair with embossed lettering, a testament to my mother's impeccable, if somewhat ostentatious taste. My attendance was, of course, expected, non-negotiable. It was a command performance, another opportunity for me to play my assigned role. The slightly awkward, perpetually single, artistically inclined older sister, a pale foil to Olivia's radiant brilliance. I had considered declining, pleading a non-existent work commitment. The thought of enduring another evening of subtle slights, of being paraded as the family's resident eccentric, was exhausting. But a part of me, perhaps the part that still clung to a vestigial hope for connection, however fragile, decided to go. And besides, Aunt Millie, my mother's younger, far more down-to-earth sister, would be there. Aunt Millie, a retired art teacher with a bohemian spirit and a refreshingly irreverent sense of humor, was my sole ally in the family, the only one who had ever shown genuine interest in my doodling. She'd even, bless her heart, tried to explain the concept of digital animation to my mother once, an effort that had been met with a blank stare and a swift change of subject. Knowing Aunt Millie would be there made the prospect of the party slightly more bearable. I chose my outfit with care, a simple, elegant dark blue dress, something that would allow me to fade into the background, to observe rather than be observed. I had no desire to compete with Olivia's inevitable designer ensemble or my mother's carefully coordinated mother-of-the-bride-to-be attire. My goal was to survive the evening with minimal damage to my already battered self-esteem, to offer polite congratulations, and to escape as early as decorum allowed. I had no inkling, of course, that this particular family gathering would be the one where the carefully constructed facade of my nobody status would come crashing down, not through any action of my own, but through the innocent curiosity of a near stranger with a smartphone and a penchant for due diligence. The engagement party was in full swing when I arrived, fashionably late enough to avoid the initial receiving line, but not so late as to be rude, a delicate balance I had perfected over years of navigating my family's social minefields. My parents' house, a sprawling colonial that always felt more like a museum than a home, was filled with a cacophony of chatter, clinking glasses, and the almost aggressively cheerful strains of a string quartet tucked away in a corner of the living room. Beatrice, my mother, greeted me at the door with a perfunctory air kiss that smelled faintly of expensive hairspray and unspoken disapproval. "Amelia, darling, you made it," she said, her eyes quickly scanning my dress, her expression unreadable but undoubtedly cataloging its perceived inadequacies. "Olivia is just over there, by the fireplace. Do go and say hello." And try to be cheerful, dear. It's a happy occasion. The implied criticism, the suggestion that my natural state was something other than cheerful, was vintage Beatrice. I navigated through the throng of guests, a mixture of my parents' business associates, Olivia's law school friends, and a contingent of Thomas's relatives who all seemed to possess the same air of understated, old-money confidence. Olivia, radiant in a pale pink dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, was indeed holding court by the grand marble fireplace, her laughter a bright, brittle sound. She saw me approach, and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Amelia, you came," she exclaimed, her voice a shade too loud, as if announcing the arrival of slightly embarrassing but unavoidable distant cousin. "Everyone, this is my sister, Amelia. She's our family's creative spirit." The introduction hung in the air, laden with all its unspoken condescension. I offered polite smiles and murmured hellos to the circle of Olivia's friends, their faces a blur of polite curiosity. Thomas, standing beside Olivia, his arm possessively around her waist, extended a hand. "Good to see you, Amelia," he said, his handshake firm, his gaze direct. He seemed, at least on the surface, less overtly judgmental than the rest of my family. Perhaps, I thought with a flicker of hope, he was just a genuinely nice guy caught in the orbit of Olivia's ambition. I managed to escape Olivia's circle after a few minutes of awkward small talk about the weather and the lovely party, and found refuge near the buffet table, a familiar strategy. Food was a reliable distraction, a neutral territory in the battlefield of family dynamics. It was there as I was contemplating the merits of a miniature quiche versus a smoked salmon canopy that Thomas found me. His initial question about my art was standard, predictable. I gave my usual vague, non-committal answer. I work with digital media, some animation, some design work. It was a carefully crafted understatement, designed to deflect further inquiry, to avoid the inevitable follow-up questions that would lead to either confusion or dismissal. Most people, upon hearing it, would nod politely and change the subject. But Thomas was different. He had the sharp, analytical mind of a lawyer, a mind that didn't readily accept vague answers. And he had his phone in his hand, his tapping on the screen, his murmuring of my name, Hayes, Amelia Hayes, sent a jolt of alarm through me. My carefully constructed anonymity as Etheria was a shield, a protection against the very kind of scrutiny and judgment my family specialized in. The thought of that shield being breached here, in this hypercritical environment, was terrifying. I watched a silent scream building in my throat as his expression shifted from polite curiosity to mild interest, then to furrowed concentration, and finally, to that look of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, then down at his phone again, as if unable to reconcile the image of the quiet, unassuming woman before him with the information on the screen. "Etheria Studios?" he breathed, the name a hushed question. "Is that are you?" Before I could respond, before I could even process the implications of this sudden, unwelcome unmasking, Beatrice had materialized beside us, her social radar impeccably tuned to any potential disruption in her perfectly orchestrated evening. Her dismissive comment about my little projects, her attempt to steer Thomas away from this boring topic, was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Thomas's incredulous echo, "Little projects?" was a gunshot in the suddenly quiet room. His subsequent question to my parents, "Beatrice, Gerald, do you have any idea who your daughter actually is?" was the cannon roar that signaled the start of an entirely new war, one I hadn't anticipated and for which I was utterly unprepared. The silence that descended upon our little corner of the engagement party was so abrupt, so complete, it felt as if someone had sucked all the air out of the room. The string quartet faltered mid-note, their bows hovering uncertainly over their instruments. Conversations dwindled. Heads turned. Even Olivia, momentarily dislodged from her pedestal as the center of attention, looked over with an expression of irritated curiosity. My mother, Beatrice, was the first to recover, though her smile was now a brittle, painted-on affair. "Thomas, dear," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. I'm not sure I understand. Of course, we know who Amelia is. She's our daughter, our wonderfully creative daughter. She patted my arm with a gesture that was meant to be affectionate, but felt more like a warning. Gerald, my father, ever the follower, chimed in, yes, yes, Thomas. Our Amelia, always full of artistic ideas. He looked profoundly uncomfortable, his gaze darting between Thomas, me, and Beatrice, as if searching for a script that would explain this unexpected deviation from the evening's planned narrative. Thomas, however, was not to be deterred. He seemed genuinely flabbergasted, caught between disbelief at my family's apparent ignorance and awe at what he was presumably seeing on his phone. He held it up, angling the screen toward my parents, though from my vantage point, I couldn't see exactly what was displayed. This, he said, his voice resonating with a newfound authority that I hadn't heard from him before. This is Etheria Studios. According to Forbes, it's one of the most innovative independent animation houses in the world. Their work on the Celestial Spheres campaign for the International Space Agency won 3 Gold Lions last year. Their founder, the creative director, known only as Etheria, is described as a reclusive genius who is redefining the boundaries of digital art. And Amelia Hayes, is listed here as the principal, the sole proprietor. He paused, letting the information sink in, his gaze sweeping from my stunned parents to my equally stunned sister, then finally to me. So, I ask again, he said, his voice now quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. Do you actually know who your daughter, your sister, really is? My mother's face had gone from brittle to ashen. The polite smile had vanished, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment, rapidly morphing into something that looked suspiciously like anger. Olivia's expression was a complex tapestry of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, resentful comprehension. It was the look of a queen who had just realized that her supposedly insignificant lady-in-waiting was, in fact, the ruler of a far richer, more powerful kingdom. I stood there, frozen, a reluctant protagonist in a drama I had never auditioned for. Part of me wanted to disappear, to melt into the expensive wallpaper and escape this sudden, unwelcome spotlight. But another part, a part that had been dormant for far too long, felt a strange, unfamiliar surge of vindication. Not triumph, not yet, but a quiet, fierce satisfaction that the truth, my truth, was finally and astoundingly, undeniably out. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. Then, my father, bless his conflict-avoidant heart, did the only thing he knew how to do when faced with an uncomfortable situation. He tried to smooth it over with a bland pleasantry. Well now, he said, clearing his throat with a series of nervous coughs. That's quite something, Amelia. Etheria Studios, you say? Very impressive. You must tell us all about it sometime. His attempt to normalize the bombshell Thomas had just dropped was so ludicrously inadequate, it was almost comical. My mother, however, was not about to let this go. Her initial shock was rapidly giving way to a defensive fury. Thomas, she said, her voice regaining its steely edge, I'm sure there's some misunderstanding. Amelia has her little computer hobbies, yes, but Forbes? Can lions? That's simply preposterous. Are you sure that's our Amelia? The insinuation, the outright denial of my achievements, even when faced with evidence from a reputable source, was classic Beatrice. If it didn't fit her narrative, it simply couldn't be true. Thomas, to his credit, didn't back down. The article includes a photograph. Beatrice, he said calmly, though his eyes held a new, appraising look as he regarded his future mother-in-law. It's heavily stylized, in shadow, but the resemblance is unmistakable. And the name, Amelia Hayes, principal of Etheria Studios, it's not exactly a common combination, is it? Olivia, who had been silent up until this point, her face a mask of carefully controlled neutrality, finally spoke. Amelia, she said, her voice tight, is this true? Have you been doing all this without telling us? There was an accusation in her tone, as if my secrecy, my success, was a personal affront to her, a betrayal of our established family roles. Before I could answer, before I could even formulate a response to the whirlwind of emotions and accusations swirling around me, Aunt Millie, my wonderful, irreverent Aunt Millie, who had been observing the entire exchange from a nearby armchair with an expression of poorly concealed amusement, chose that moment to make her entrance. She rose, a mischievous twinkle in her eye, and sauntered over, a half-empty glass of champagne in her hand. Well, she said, her voice carrying easily in the sudden lull. It seems the cat, or rather, the incredibly talented digital panther, is finally out of the bag. And about time, too, if you ask me. She turned to my mother, her smile dangerously sweet. Beatrice, darling, you look a little pale. Perhaps you should sit down. All this unexpected success in the family can be quite a shock to the system, can it? Especially when it's not coming from the officially sanctioned golden child. The collective gasp from my mother, Olivia, and even my father was almost audible. Aunt Millie had just thrown a verbal grenade into the heart of their carefully constructed illusion, and the fallout was going to be spectacular. The immediate aftermath of Aunt Millie's pronouncement was a chaotic tableau of sputtering indignation from my mother, stunned silence from Olivia, and my father looking like he wished the Persian rug would swallow him whole. Thomas, bless his increasingly bewildered soul, just stood there, his phone still displaying the Forbes article like a smoking gun. Millicent, Beatrice finally managed, her voice trembling with rage. How dare you? This is Olivia's engagement party. You are deliberately trying to cause trouble. Trouble, Beatrice? Aunt Millie replied, taking a leisurely sip of her champagne. I thought we were celebrating Amelia's rather astonishing achievements. Or did I miss the memo that only one daughter's successes are deemed worthy of acknowledgement in this family? She winked at me, a gesture of solidarity that warmed me to my core. Olivia, finding her voice, rounded on me, her eyes blazing with a mixture of resentment and injured pride. Why didn't you tell us, Amelia? She demanded. Why all the secrecy? Were you ashamed of us? Or did you just enjoy making us all look like fools? Ashamed of you, Olivia, I replied, my voice surprisingly calm, a strange sense of detachment settling over me. No, perhaps I was just tired of having my work dismissed as a little project or a computer thingamajig. Perhaps I just wanted to build something on my own terms, without the constant critiques and comparisons. My mother interjected, her voice shrill. Comparisons? We never compared you. We only ever wanted what was best for you, for both of you. If you just applied yourself to something practical, something sensible like Olivia, like law, you mean? Aunt Millie cut in smoothly. A fine and noble profession, to be sure. But last I checked, Beatrice, winning Gold Lions a can for groundbreaking digital animation and being lauded by Forbes as a visionary isn't exactly small potatoes. In fact, I'd say it's rather more innovative than drafting prenuptial agreements, wouldn't you? Olivia flushed a deep, unbecoming red. Thomas looked profoundly uncomfortable, as if he'd inadvertently stumbled into a long-running family feud, which of course he had. He cleared his throat. Look, he said, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation, this is obviously a lot to take in. Perhaps we could all just congratulate Amelia on her incredible success and move on with the party. It was a valiant attempt at peacemaking, but the fault lines in our family had been ripped wide open, and no amount of polite social lubricant was going to smooth them over now. My father, finally finding his voice, though it was weak and wavering, tried to support Thomas. Yes, Amelia, congratulations, dear. We're very proud of you, of course. We had no idea. No idea. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? They had no idea because they had never bothered to ask, never bothered to look beyond their preconceived notions of who I was, of what I was capable of. Their ignorance was a willful blindness, a deliberate choice to see me only as the less-than daughter, the artistic eccentric, the one who would never quite measure up. The rest of the party passed in a blur of awkward encounters and strained conversations. The news of my secret identity, as Etheria spread through the room like wildfire, fueled by Aunt Millie's gleeful and not-so-subtle elaborations to anyone who would listen. I found myself surrounded by a small, curious crowd of guests, mostly Thomas's relatives and some of my parents' more open-minded acquaintances, all asking questions about my work, their eyes alight with genuine interest. It was a bizarre and unsettling experience to suddenly be the focus of such positive attention in a setting where I had always been invisible. My mother, after her initial outburst, retreated into a state of icy, furious silence, occasionally shooting daggers at me from across the room. Olivia alternated between avoiding me altogether and making pointedly sarcastic remarks to her friends, just loud enough for me to overhear. Can you believe it? Amelia, the reclusive genius. Who knew? Her bitterness was a palpable thing, a sour counterpoint to the newfound respect I was receiving from others. Thomas, to his credit, seemed genuinely fascinated and, dare I say, impressed. He sought me out again later in the evening, his earlier bewildered symptomy now replaced by a thoughtful curiosity. I've been reading more about Etheria Studios, he said, his phone once again in hand. The work is breathtaking, Amelia. The Celestial Spheres campaign. I remember seeing that. It was incredible. I had no idea it was you. Not many people do, I replied with a small, wry smile. That was rather the point, I suppose. But why keep it a secret from your own family? He asked, his brow furrowed in genuine puzzlement. I hesitated, unsure how to explain decades of complex family dynamics to this near stranger, this man who was about to marry into the heart of that dysfunction. Let's just say, I said carefully, that sometimes dreams need to be nurtured in private, away from unwelcome scrutiny, until they're strong enough to withstand the storm. He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. I think, he said, I'm beginning to understand. As the party began to wind down, my father approached me, his expression a mixture of pride, confusion, and a deep, underlying sadness. Amelia, he said, his voice gruff with emotion, I owe you an apology. I should have paid more attention. I should have seen. I'm proud of you, kiddo. Really, truly proud. It was the most direct, unambiguous expression of approval I had ever received from him, and it brought a lump to my throat. It wasn't a magical absolution for years of neglect, but it was a start, a tiny crack of light in the wall of our estrangement. I left the party that night with Aunt Millie, feeling a strange cocktail of emotions. Exhaustion, vindication, sadness, and a tentative, fragile hope. The carefully constructed facade of my family had been shattered, and the pieces were scattered everywhere. I had no idea how, or if, they could ever be put back together again. But as Aunt Millie squeezed my arm and said, well, darling, that was certainly more entertaining than any wedding I've been to in years, I couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in my life, I was finally standing on solid ground, my own ground, a ground I had built myself, pixel by painstaking pixel. The silence from Beatrice and Olivia in the days following the engagement party was deafening. It was a silence laden with resentment, with unspoken accusations, with the sheer, unadulterated fury of two women whose carefully controlled narrative had been spectacularly upended. I knew my mother well enough to understand that her primary emotion wouldn't be pride in my achievements, but anger at my audacity. The audacity to be successful on my own terms, the audacity to have a life, a talent that existed outside her sphere of influence and understanding. Olivia, I suspected, was grappling with a more complex cocktail of emotions. Jealousy, certainly, but perhaps also a dawning, uncomfortable realization that her lesser, older sister was not, in fact, lesser at all. The carefully maintained hierarchy of their world had been shaken to its core, and they were not pleased. My father, however, surprised me. He called a few days later, his voice still hesitant, but with a new note of respect. Amelia, he began, I've been doing some reading about this Etheria Studios. It's quite remarkable what you've built. Truly, I had no idea the scope of it. Not many people did, Dad, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. That was by design. Yes, well, he cleared his throat. I understand that now. Perhaps. Your mother she's having a difficult time processing all of this. I can imagine, I said, a touch of irony in my voice that I hoped he missed. She's not used to surprises, especially not from me. No, he agreed, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of decades of marital compromise. But Amelia, I want you to know, I am proud of you. Deeply proud. I may not have always shown it or understood what you were doing, but I am. His words, so simple, so long overdue, brought an unexpected sting to my eyes. It wasn't the effusive, performative pride my mother reserved for Olivia's every minor triumph, but a quiet, genuine acknowledgement from a man I had always, on some level, yearned to connect with. Thank you, Dad, I said, my voice a little shaky. That means a lot to me. We talked for a little longer, a stilted but not entirely uncomfortable conversation about the animation industry, about the challenges of running a creative business, about the Celestial Spheres campaign which he had, to my astonishment, actually looked up on YouTube. It was the most substantive conversation we'd had in years, perhaps ever. Before he hung up, he said, "Your mother, she'll come around, Amelia. Eventually. She needs time." I wasn't so sure. Beatrice's pride was a formidable fortress, and her need to control the narrative was deeply ingrained. But for the first time, I realized that whether she came around or not was no longer the central question of my life. Her approval, once the elusive holy grail I had subconsciously pursued, now seemed less important. I had found validation elsewhere, in my work, in the respect of my peers, in the quiet satisfaction of my own achievements, and, surprisingly, in the unexpected admiration of my sister's fiancé. Thomas called me a week after the party. "Amelia," he said, his voice earnest, "I hope you're doing okay. Things have been a little tense around here." "I can imagine," I replied dryly. Understatement of a year. "Look," he continued, "I know this is probably none of my business, but she's really struggling with this. She feels blindsided, a little betrayed, I think." "Betrayed?" I echoed, a flash of my old anger returning. She felt betrayed? "Thomas, I'm the one who has been systematically dismissed and undervalued by my own family for my entire life. My success, which I achieved without a shred of their support or encouragement, is not a betrayal of her. It's a testament to my own resilience." I know, he said quickly, "and I agree with you. Completely. What I meant was, her perception, it's all very skewed. She's built her identity around being the successful one, the achiever. And now, to find out that you, the artistic, impractical sister, are this global phenomenon, it's shaken her to her core." His insight was surprisingly astute. He was right. Olivia's entire sense of self, so carefully constructed in opposition to me, was now under threat. "And what about you, Thomas?" I asked, genuinely curious. "How do you feel about all this? Marrying into this particular brand of crazy?" He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Let's just say my eyes have been opened wide. I thought I was marrying into a normal, albeit slightly overachieving, family. I'm beginning to realize it's more like a script for a particularly intense psychological drama." He paused, then added, his voice softer, "For what it's worth, Amelia, I think what you've done with Etheria is incredible. Truly. I spent hours on your website after the party. The artistry, the innovation, it's breathtaking. You have a gift. And frankly, your family's inability to see that says far more about them than it does about you." His words, so unexpected, so genuinely appreciative, were another small step on the path to healing. To have anyone from that side of the family acknowledge my work, my worth, without reservation, was profoundly validating. The wedding preparations, I heard through the grapevine, mostly Aunt Millie, who was still receiving reluctant updates from my father, continued, though apparently with a new undercurrent of tension. Olivia, according to Aunt Millie, was even more bridezilla-ish than usual, and Beatrice was micromanaging everyone into a state of near hysteria. It seemed my unexpected elevation from family nobody to secretly successful tech visionary had thrown a rather large wrench into their carefully oiled machine of familial dysfunction. I focused on my work. Etheria Studios was busier than ever. The Forbes article and the subsequent buzz from the engagement party incident, which had, of course, become a whispered legend in certain Westport social circles, had led to a new wave of inquiries, new project proposals. I hired 2 more animators, a project manager, and even a part-time administrative assistant to help me manage the influx. The Nest, my once solitary studio, was now a humming hive of creative energy. One afternoon, about a month before the wedding, I received a registered letter. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. My heart sank. Was Beatrice or Olivia planning some sort of legal action? Were they going to try to claim I had somehow slandered them? With trembling hands, I opened it. It wasn't from them. It was a letter informing me that a distant great-aunt on my father's side, a woman I had met only a few times as a child and had almost forgotten existed, had passed away and had, to my utter astonishment, left me a small but significant inheritance. Great-aunt Eleanor, ironically, sharing my mother's name, though not her disposition, had apparently been a quiet, unassuming woman who had amassed a surprisingly substantial portfolio through shrewd, lifelong investing. She had no children of her own, and her will, a copy of which was enclosed, stipulated that her estate be divided among her grandnieces and grandnephews who had demonstrated a commitment to independent thought and creative endeavor, regardless of conventional measures of success. My name was specifically mentioned, along with a handwritten addendum from Great-Aunt Eleanor herself, to Amelia, who always saw the world a little differently. May this help you continue to paint your own stars. I sat there, stunned, the letter clutched in my hand, tears streaming down my face. This woman, this near stranger, had seen me, had recognized something in me that my own parents had been blind to. Her gift, so unexpected, so validating, felt like a message from the universe, a confirmation that I was on the right path, that my unconventional choices had a worth and a meaning all their own. The inheritance wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to provide a significant boost to Etheria Studios, enough to allow me to take on more ambitious projects, to invest in new technology, to dream even bigger. It was also enough to give me a profound sense of financial independence, a freedom from ever having to rely on or even consider my parents' conditional generosity again. It was, in its own quiet way, another form of liberation. The story of my great-aunt's unexpected bequest rippled through the family, causing another minor earthquake. Beatrice, I heard through Aunt Millie, was incensed. An eccentric old woman rewarding Amelia's impractical fantasies, she'd reportedly fumed. It's an outrage. That money should have gone to someone sensible like Olivia, someone who knows how to manage it properly. Her reaction was predictable, and by now, almost amusing to me. Her world was so narrowly defined by money and status that she couldn't comprehend an act of generosity rooted in an appreciation for creativity and independent spirit. Olivia's wedding day arrived, and I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no longing to be there. I spent the day at my studio, brainstorming a new short film project with my team, a whimsical piece about a star who gets lost and has to find its way back to its constellation. The work was joyful, collaborative, fulfilling. Later that evening, Aunt Millie and I went out for a quiet dinner, celebrating not a wedding, but our own enduring bond, our shared appreciation for unconventional choices and lives lived authentically. She raised her glass. To Etheria, she said, her eyes twinkling, and to Amelia, may you both continue to light up the sky. As we clinked glasses, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was no longer a nobody. I was Etheria. I was Amelia. I was the creator of my own worlds, the author of my own story. And that was more than enough. It was everything. My life after the Google search incident, as Aunt Millie cheekily dubbed it, continued to unfold in ways I could never have predicted. The inheritance from Great-Aunt Eleanor provided Etheria Studios with the capital to expand significantly. We moved into a larger studio space, a bright, airy loft in a converted warehouse district, a far cry from my cramped apartment. We hired more talented animators, programmers, and designers, building a team that shared my passion for pushing the boundaries of digital storytelling. Our reputation grew, not just for technical innovation, but for creating work with heart, with soul, with a unique artistic vision that resonated with audiences worldwide. We won more awards, landed more prestigious clients, and collaborated on projects that were both creatively fulfilling and commercially successful. The reclusive genius persona of Etheria, once a shield, gradually began to integrate with Amelia Hayes, the confident, capable CEO. I started doing more public speaking, sharing my journey, advocating for diversity and innovation in the tech and animation industries. It wasn't always easy. The old whispers of self-doubt, ingrained by years of familial dismissiveness, still surfaced occasionally. But now I had the tools and the support system to quiet them. My relationship with my father evolved. He made a genuine effort to understand my world, asking thoughtful questions about my projects, even attempting to grasp the basics of animation software, with hilariously inept results that we both laughed about. He never fully stood up to Beatrice. That, I realized, was a battle he was never equipped to fight, but he found his own quiet ways to express his pride and support for me. He'd send me articles about advancements in digital technology, or call just to say he'd seen an Etheria Studios credit on a commercial and felt a swell of pride. It was a fragile connection, but it was real, and I cherished it. Thomas, my sister's husband, became an unexpected ally. After the initial shock of the engagement party reveal, he seemed to undergo a significant recalibration of his understanding of the Hayes family dynamics. He and I developed a cordial, if somewhat distant, relationship based on a shared, unspoken acknowledgement of the family's eccentricities. He would occasionally reach out with a legal question related to intellectual property for Etheria, or just to share an amusing anecdote about the latest Westport Society drama. I sensed he was often walking a tightrope in his marriage to Olivia, caught between her ingrained sense of entitlement and his own dawning awareness of the family's dysfunction. Olivia remained Olivia. Her reaction to my continued success was a complex mixture of jealousy, resentment, and a grudging, almost bewildered, respect. We never regained any semblance of sisterly closeness. Perhaps it had never truly existed, but our interactions, when they occurred, mostly at obligatory extended family gatherings orchestrated by well-meaning relatives, became less overtly hostile, more characterized by a wary, armed truce. She couldn't deny my achievements any longer, not when they were so public, so undeniable. But I sensed she would always see me as the sister who had stolen her thunder, who had disrupted the natural order of things where she was destined to be the sole star. Beatrice, my mother, was the most difficult piece of the puzzle. For a long time after the engagement party, she maintained an icy distance, her disapproval a palpable force field. She never acknowledged Etheria's success, never commented on the awards or the positive press. It was as if my entire professional life, the very essence of who I had become, simply didn't exist in her carefully curated reality. Then, about 2 years after the incident, something shifted. Aunt Millie called me. "You're not going to believe this, Maya," she said, her voice a mixture of amusement and disbelief. Beatrice just cornered me at the Garden Club luncheon and spent a full 20 minutes boasting about her brilliantly successful daughter, the animation visionary. Apparently, Etheria Studios is now her favorite topic of conversation with her society friends. She even tried to explain quantum computing to Mrs. Henderson, with predictably disastrous results. I was stunned. Beatrice, taking credit for my success, bragging about the very doodling she had once so vehemently dismissed. The hypocrisy was breathtaking, but also strangely pathetic. It was her way, I realized, of trying to reclaim a narrative that had spun so far out of her control. If she couldn't diminish my success, she would try to absorb it, to make it a reflection of her own supposed good parenting, her own artistic lineage. I never confronted her about it. What was the point? I knew the truth. And more importantly, I no longer needed her validation. Her attempts to co-opt my achievements were just another manifestation of her own insecurities, her own desperate need to be at the center of every story. My peace came not from changing her, but from changing myself, from detaching from her approval, from building my own sources of worth and validation. One evening, I was invited to give a TED Talk about creativity, innovation, and the journey of Etheria Studios. As I stood on that famous red circle, sharing my story with a global audience, I thought back to that engagement party, to Thomas innocently Googling my name, to the look of stunned disbelief on my family's faces. It had been a moment of excruciating exposure, but it had also been a moment of profound liberation. It was the catalyst that had forced me to confront the truth of my family and the truth of myself. In the audience that night was a group of young women, aspiring animators and tech entrepreneurs, who had reached out to me after my Forbes article. I had started a small mentorship program offering guidance and support to young creatives who, like me, might be struggling against dismissive voices or a lack of belief. Seeing their eager, hopeful faces, I knew that this was the true measure of my success. Not the awards, not the accolades, not the company valuation, but the ability to inspire others, to help them find their own voice, their own Etheria. After the TED Talk, as I was greeting well-wishers, a young woman approached me, her eyes shining. "Ms. Hayes, Etheria," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "Your story, it's my story. My family, they don't understand my dreams either. But hearing you tonight, it gave me so much hope. Thank you." I smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile. "Keep dreaming," I told her, "and never let anyone, no matter who they are, tell you that your little projects don't matter. They're the sparks that can light up the world." The journey from being the family nobody to a recognized visionary had been long, arduous, and often incredibly painful. But it had taught me the most valuable lesson of all, that our true worth is not defined by the perceptions of others, especially those who are determined to misunderstand us, but by the passion we pursue, the work we create, and the courage we find to be unapologetically, brilliantly ourselves. If you've ever had a Google search moment that changed the way people saw you, or if you've struggled against being underestimated, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Your experiences are a powerful reminder that we all have a unique light to share. And please, if this resonated with you, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of empowerment and unexpected turns of fate, and always remember, the most important search you can ever do is the one that helps you discover your own incredible worth. Thank you for listening.